Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. My name is Amy Mullenex. I am a PhD student in communications at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Today I'm presenting a project produced in collaboration with the Media Migration Lab in New York, Tracing Crisis in Ukraine. This modular multimedia project traces media discourses about the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and how those discourses are complicated by lived experiences of forced migration in southeastern Europe. This project illustrates how media functions as an active participant in the purposeful erasure of the region's complex historical relationship to border and sovereignty. The concept for this project stems from viewing Google Maps footage while visiting my mother's parents, who are Holocaust survivors from Moldova. Each of my grandparents are battling Alzheimer's and dementia. I've been exceedingly curious about their lives in the Soviet Union as children and young adults, and have never been party to these buried stories. However, the advent of Alzheimer's in my grandmother has also served as a sort of floodgate through which stories began to pour out. So surprising and in many cases so disturbing, I initially suspected confabulation on part of her Alzheimer's diagnosis. However, all of the stories are true. While visiting with my grandparents, I listened to these new stories and then tried to search for the locations where they happened using Google Street View in an effort to see what my grandparents saw. And I noticed when viewing Google Maps that in this region, many areas are totally blank for Street View, while others are digitally captured to the nth degree, including in some areas of Romania Street View footage of the interiors of gas stations and people's homes. In contrast, large swaths of Ukrainian territory are completely in the dark. And I additionally noticed when reviewing the interface of Street View that the webbed lines appeared in some way visually similar to a neural network. And I here made a link for the first time between the surprising and at times inconsistent or seemingly forgotten aspects of my grandparents' storytelling and the maps of knowledge presented by Google Street View, which in many cases left entire regions unmapped or forgotten. Thus, one major aspect of this modular project traces my grandparents' personal experiences with deportation between Romania, Ukraine, Moldova, Kazakhstan, and other areas of the Caucasus between 1930 and 1979. I utilized audio recordings of my grandparents and interwove these with fragmented 3D renderings I produced on Blender based on family photographs, and I overlaid this on webbed maps lifted from Google Street View and created a sort of walkthrough style desktop documentary with all of this footage. These modules are cutting up the other pieces in this work, which document digitally hosted discourses about the occupation of Ukraine. Memory has both the ability to degrade nuance and to preserve it, and this project explores both aspects of this binary through the comparison of personal memory and collective imagination. This project additionally engages social media depictions of Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Zelensky's bids for international aid have been highly publicized on social media through his X and Instagram accounts, and especially through live streams which are always dubbed in English or posted in multiple languages. Putin's speeches, in contrast, are regularly published in Russian through highly controlled narratives from the Russian government's official social media accounts. And at times, the diametric opposition between the visual imagery in these videos is really so sensational that it begins to seem fictionalized. It is at this point that melodramatic and binary archetypes coalesce. Putin is almost always seen wearing suits, so Zelensky opts for army fatigues. Putin delivers information through overtly staged, convoluted speeches to huge crowds, so Zelensky stages live streams in t-shirts directly to camera. This binary is often referenced by Zelensky himself in public speeches and digital media posts. In February 2023, he described this dynamic as a David and Goliath story, which is a phrase that several news networks subsequently used. Also important to note is Putin's claim that Zelensky spearheads a Nazi regime in Ukraine, and Zelensky's subsequent emphasis on his Jewish identity and his grandparents' suffering during the Holocaust. Positioning Zelensky as a neo-fascist and a neo-Nazi against the Russian government, here framed as saviors, exhibits a key method of constructing the fantasy of sovereignty, erasing the histories of persecution of minority groups from national histories. Digital media, in its fleeting, rapidly cycling character, offers a flexible dynamic through which to process and iterate culture, and to an increasing extent to reconstruct how historical events are culturally remembered. Digital reenactments of war serve to echo, reproduce, and solidify long-standing methods of bordering and exclusion in the region. Digitally represented war decontextualizes and magnifies spectacles of violence via the strategic construction of binaries of oppressor and oppressed. This project asserts that it is impossible to trace the occupation of Ukraine or begin to understand it without firmly attaching the crisis to both its histories and its futures. This project also speculates that digital media maintains the ability to glitch material events through a sort of digital cultural scrubbing. How this war will last in cultural memory remains to be seen. Please feel free to view the project in its entirety utilizing the link shared on the first slide of this presentation. Thank you so much for your time.